Well, I'm the best corner in the game. What a run. Marshawn Lynch. Get off me.
DK. Yes, sir. Hey, it's John Schneider with the Seattle Seahawks.
That's the result you're going to
This offense just in general. I mean, you had
To
a
me,
guy
just
like
watching
that.
his film, he seems more of a back.
Just the presence he's got in that pocket, the way he throws the football. Russ days, man, all the scrutiny that line was under.
This Monday night's big.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Hawk Zone Rundown with RMac and B-Ryce. We're coming at you here. Guys, before we get started, hit that subscribe button down there at the bottom. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. So you guys are, you're going to know when future episodes are coming up there. And we keep bringing you the content. But coming on the show a little later, we're going to have Kevin Oestreicher from Baltimore, and he's got his own podcast that he's been doing it for quite a while. Locked On Ravens. He's also a writer for the Ravens Wire. So we're gonna get his insight, obviously, on the new head coach Mike MacDonald, and so we're just gonna ask him a whole bunch of good stuff and get his inside info on that. But before that, man, obviously, we just had the Super Bowl in Vegas. Chiefs, Niners, B-Ryce. What's going on, man? Your thoughts of the game? What was the feel? Man, what do you got?
Honestly, man, like the first half of that game was boring. And I was sitting there and I'm like, what am I watching? Like, this is supposed to be Patrick Mahomes, this dominant defense. Like, at least in those games, like it was like 3-and-out, 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 like sacks, hard hits, something. Give me something to get excited about. Never really happened. And like, I don't know. End of all, Chiefs won. So for Seahawks fans, we're happy. The Niners get to cry again.
Yeah.
I don't know, dude. I'm not inspired by it. Like, it felt, what, I'll say this. It felt the perfect way to end a shitty NFL season, because it has been a shitty NFL season. The offenses have been down all year. Quarterback play has been down across the board. This year just felt odd. And like, that was an odd Super Bowl to end on. Like, you didn't get really any excitement until overtime. But again, Kyle Shanahan can't win the big game. He's proven that. Do you realize he has had between his 3 Super Bowl appearances, 45 points worth of a lead, 2 10-point leads, and a 25-point lead, and he has blown every Super Bowl? Like, I don't know how they're not going to get rid of Kyle Shanahan. He's an innovative genius, but there is clearly some sort of disconnect, because whenever he gets in these big games, and I've heard other people talk about it, and I totally agree with him, the guy goes completely off script of what got them there. Like, they ran the ball so well. Yes, McCaffrey fumbled. Keep running the ball. Like, I'm sure when we talk to Kevin later on this, he's going to tell us that that's what Baltimore should have done in their game, is continue to run the ball. So honestly, RMac, man, like it was a Super Bowl. It's done. I'm more excited now for our offseason, what's going on with our Hawks. Coaching hires have come out on, they finalized 7 of their coaches, which we'll talk about. Players are getting ready for the combine and the mock drafts and all that kind of stuff. Like, I'm just ready to go for this. Like, that has got me way more excited than what Sunday was.
Oh, trust me, man. I'm excited. We're going to jump into that stuff. But like, I got a few points here on this Super Bowl real quick. First of all, you brought up McCaffrey in overtime there, right? Okay, first of all, he completely went away from him in like the second and third quarters. Like, completely. I was like, is he hurt? Like, he's your best player on your team, man. Best player on your team. And then they're in overtime and they're running the ball. And I'm sitting there like, heck, they're going to score a touchdown. They're going to score. He's just running it. He's running down their throats, right? Like, he's getting 6 yards, 7 yards. You know what I mean? And then what does he do? Oh, I'm going to let, and again, I'm not hating on the guy, but he's your weakest link on offense. And now you're letting him try to win you the game. Brock Purdy. And he doesn't, right? And then it's 4th and 4. And then what are you going to do? So you kick the 3 points. They got, and we don't even have to talk about the new rules. Apparently, a lot of the players in San Francisco didn't even know about the new rules. So there's a Shanahan blunder, right? Here's the other thing. Like you brought up, there was no like amazing defense in this game. It was just bad football. Like you didn't have like big sacks and big plays, and it was just poor football. And it's funny when you see a low scoring game and people get confused sometimes because you're watching Patrick Mahomes. They're a great defensive game, just a great defensive game. I didn't see that. Why? Because he's not playing good. Like he's literally shit in the bed. Like he just didn't play good. He didn't play good. And then of course he puts a drive together in overtime, but Brock Purdy in San Francisco didn't play great. So it just, but here's the other thing that I have a problem with in these Super Bowls. I'm getting more hype now, unless the Seahawks are in it, for championship weekend. These
Yep.
neutral site games in Las Vegas, like there is zero energy in those stadiums. It's the celebrities, it's this and that. Like I get it, it's a big money maker, and they charge stupid amounts of money. But to me, as a fan, and you're watching this, and you're like, the energy was flat, no matter what was happening. Like even the winning drive and touchdown, like and I mean, they're always going to have these neutral site games, but you think, what if you just gave it to the team with the best record and they get a home game? Like I don't know, man. You get to the Super Bowl and you almost get, it's like a huge championship weekend, and then 2 weeks of media, and then this Super Bowl game and the dome in Vegas, and you're like, I mean, what are your thoughts on that, man?
I can see your point 100% on the lack of energy. It's astronomical to go to a Super Bowl. Like, let's
Yeah,
be honest here. You're
yeah,
paying the cheapest seat, I think, was rated at like 15 grand or something for nosebleeds. What I've heard though from a lot of people that were, there and other reporters and stuff, apparently the atmosphere around Vegas was awesome
I
for it.
bet,
Like
I bet.
it was unreal. LA had the same kind of vibe when they had it at SoFi
Yeah,
there. I would like them to, how they move the draft every year? Like it
hmm
goes everywhere throughout
yeah.
I'd like them to start doing that more with the Super Bowl because we get so many repeats. Oh, we're back to Miami. Oh,
Well, they
we're
want to
back to
do
New
they do the
Orleans.
warm climates. It's like you can't,
Right.
like they did the one time in New York, and they're like, we can't do it again.
But the New York Super Bowl was great.
It was great.
Minus the game, but
Sure.
like the atmosphere, excuse me, the atmosphere and everything was awesome. And
Hmm.
people even said that. And you know, Seattle, I think Seattle would be great to host a Super Bowl. And
Amazing.
people would think, oh, well, the rain and all the cold, like that's football though,
I
people.
know.
Like that's football. Like there's one stadium I know that couldn't really hold a Super Bowl, which would be Lambeau, because it's just the town
Sure.
around it can't host it. But Seattle, you've got so much stuff you could do in the Seattle area to host Super Bowl. It's just to me like I look at it and I go, if you give the home field advantage to the team with the better record, it makes it kind of unfair playing field. At this point, it's we want to see the two teams play it out, not hey, like if Seattle was in the Super Bowl and it's at Lumen Field, you know that there's not going to be any fans in there, possibly from the other team, because everybody in Seattle is going to that game to cause noise and ruckus. There's one gripe I have from the Super Bowl, man, and it's to do a lot with the reporters, the fanboy people. Can we get off this? Like, I've seen guys that I even know going, well, that ends the conversation. Patrick Mahomes is the GOAT.
Yeah. No.
He's
No.
he's not.
He's
He's not
not.
even close
I
to it. And
agree
I
with you.
get that he's a freak talent, and people are trying to compare him to Jordan already.
I've seen that. It's crazy.
The dude lost to Brady when Brady was in his 40s with a better roster
Yes.
than the Tampa Bay team.
Yes.
And people go, oh, well, look at what he's doing. The generational time that Patrick's playing in, receivers can't be touched. Players, and you listen to Brady talk about it. His first three Super Bowls, yeah, he didn't put up these gaudy numbers, but he also got his team there in a much harder NFL where guys were getting lit up. You had Ray Lewis in his prime. You had the vaunted Baltimore and Pittsburgh defenses in their time when they could actually hit you and knock you the fuck out. And that's where I look at it and I go, we got to stop this conversation.
You got to.
He's in a different era. Let him be the greatest for his era. That's the reality of it. Because I don't think if we take Patrick Mahomes and not this Chiefs team, or you could take the Chiefs team, put them back in that era of the early 2000s when Brady and Manning and all these guys were coming up. But with those rules, I think there's a big struggle gap. Look at Andy Reid. Andy Reid was in Philadelphia during those eras with a dynamic quarterback in Donovan McNabb. How many Super Bowls did Andy Reid win? Exactly. Now you get this new era of NFL where it's a lot more lax. And Andy Reid, genius football mind,
Yes.
never going to doubt that, can do a lot more with guys because there's a lot more space to run open. You don't have to worry about your receiver getting killed on a 2-yard slant route by a linebacker that's going to rip his head off. And that's the reality. So you can't compare this. Mahomes is the GOAT now that he's won 3. He'd have to play in 10 Super Bowls, which is what Brady did. Regardless if Brady lost 3, he played in 10 championships.
Right.
That is a completely different standard to get yourself to 10 championships. And in my opinion, the Patriot dynasty is still the ultimate dynasty of all time.
It's the ultimate dynasty because of how long it went. And listen, first of all, I'm going to say this to anybody listening. I'm not a Brady guy. I respect the hell out of him. I'm not some Tom Brady fanboy. But I'm sorry, dude. 7 rings. 7 rings. Like I was hearing GOAT after Mahomes won 1 ring. Like, do people have a short memory? Like, and then you want to compare the Jordan thing, and then you want to talk about stats. Well, tell me Jordan's stats. 6 rings, 6-0, and 6-0, and that's so. But now you want to say, but now you're cherry picking. You're saying, well, Tom has 7, but here's his yards and stats in the first couple Super Bowl. No, you can't have it both ways. Listen, 7 rings, man, 10 Super Bowl. Like, again, it won't be touched. It will not be. He will not get there. And listen, I'm sorry. You want to talk stats? I don't even know what his stats were. He didn't play a great game. Listen, I'm not. He's an amazing player. He's great, and he'll go down. He'll be a Hall of Famer. He might have another Super Bowl. Maybe we'll see. We'll see how long Andy sticks around. But things change. I mean, and I'm not going to say, well, he played against Brock and he played against Jimmy G. You know, whatever. I don't really necessarily believe in like you're playing the other quarterback. Like, yeah, that's the matchup. But to that point, they did go head to head. So Tom played him, and he played Tom, and Tom won with not as good of a team. So at the age of, I don't even know, 40 something. So how can you sit there unless you just have a short memory and you don't remember watching Tom? Tom was an animal. Like, he was a competitor. Like, he don't let the pretty boyness fool you. Like, he like, a lot of ways Jordan-esque. Like the stories of Jordan slapping dudes at practice. Tom was in you. Like, don't think this guy was this super nice dude just winning championship. So you got to give him respect. And to me, who else is going to say, like, this guy's a GOAT and Jordan's got like I hate the Jordan thing, man. Like, stop it. Just, like you said, you're not even close to the guy. First of all, why is he just leapfrogging Montana all of a sudden too? Like, let's give him some respect. 4 rings, perfect record. So like, I just slow down. Like,
well,
like
it's the same thing, man. We want to go with 4 rings. Okay, cool. So there's Montana. There's also Terry Bradshaw that won 4 with the Steelers that everyone seems to forget about too. And like, here's my other whole gripe with the situation is like, you look at this whole thing with Brady. His first 3 years, can you name me his tight end and his 3 receivers that he won Super Bowls with? And everyone's going, oh, look at Mahomes this year. He didn't have Tyreek. He still has probably one of the greatest tight ends of all time in Travis Kelce. And his first 2 other Super Bowls that he ended up winning, Tyreek was around. And so don't go cry to me that, oh, this year he had no weapons. He couldn't do, it was a miracle that he did what he did. He is a generational talent, 100%. I will go to my grave saying that about Patrick Mahomes.
Yes.
But do not come with me at the GOAT conversation until, and everyone wants to throw stats. What do you freaking do? If you look at Tom Brady's entire career, he has 3 separate Hall of Fame careers in one career of a player. He had his first 3 Super Bowls, then he had his next 3, then he had his time with the end of.
That's what makes the run so. That's what makes the run so great. It's not like you're like, well, he won 3, but he had this defense and he didn't win. It's like, no. Then he had the second part, and the fact that you go through different receivers and different, it didn't matter. And then like, who did he have? Edelman. Like, yeah, he was good, but he's not, like, come on. And then you talk about, then he leaves Bill, and he goes somewhere else and wins. I mean, hey man, like, he capped it off. And he
Let's see what Mahomes does without Reed.
So we're not sitting here saying, Like you and me both agree, this guy's a generational talent. He's great. But when
100%.
you start saying GOAT, it's just disrespectful to the guys before you who have won. And like go before Brady, you got Montana. Like, that was the debate before Tom just sort of took off with the rings. Is it Montana? Is it Brady? Brady, Montana. And then, okay, listen, the guy's got 7 rings. He's the guy. Montana second. But it was like Pat gets on, wins a Super Bowl, he's GOAT. Because like you said, to start bringing up statistics, it's like, no, that's not the best
If we want to start throwing
ever.
passing statistics, what would happen if we had Dan Marino still playing? That guy is still the greatest passer in his season in 1983. Like,
Right.
you can't throw stats in this and be like, oh, well, because we throw the NFL game is completely different.
Yeah, stats really just don't. You can't compare passing yards from this era to that era.
No, it doesn't
It's
work. The game's
impossible.
completely different. It's like hockey. It's like comparing hockey players, Gretzky and Crosby.
And if sports evolve, right? Like you can
Yeah.
go NBA, 3 pointers, you go down the list. But yeah, we won't go on this forever. But it's just I agree with you 100%. Like I had a conversation with a guy yesterday or the day before, same thing. It was like you either have a short memory or you just didn't watch a lot of what was going on. And honestly, some people look at Brady and they see this pretty boy dude who's like, no, this guy was an ultimate competitor, and there's a reason why he has 7 rings, man. The guy wanted to keep playing. You can talk about the personal family life too. The guy kept playing. It was like, Tom, I thought you were retiring. No, I'm coming back. Like he just kept having that juice in him to keep going. And that's just all ultra competitor. Like I said, I've never even I hated the Patriots. I freaking hated them. I didn't like them, and not even anything to do with the Seahawks Super Bowl. It's like I just never liked the Patriots, and but you got to give respect for where it's due, and I just think the guy is. I don't think anyone will ever touch that. Not even. I mean, and like you said, I'm sorry, man, but things can change quick on a dime. Andy leaves. There's a different regime in there. You just never know. And so that's we're in agreement on that, man. So you know, it's crazy. But yeah, overall with the Super Bowl, man, I don't know. I watched the whole thing. It was good. The overtime drive, it was great. And I'm glad the Chiefs won. I'm not going to sit here and say I didn't. I mean, we're Seahawks fans. What do we expect? I'm super happy that, finally, that they just get it off. It was too close. Man, it was just too close. And then you look, I saw a meme today, and I forgot about Kaepernick. You saw they had a thing with the 3 QBs, lost. Jimmy G, Purdy, and Cap. And I've said it before where I think the weakest link on their team was quarterback, and it was really no different when Jimmy G was here, man. Like it just really wasn't.
Honestly, man, like I agree with you. Like Brock Purdy is a good quarterback. I
Yeah,
will not take that away from him. But
for
Brock
sure.
Purdy is the type of quarterback, if you're going to win a Super Bowl, you need to have a perfect game plan and a bunch of weapons around him. And I look at some of it was kind of like when Russ won his Super Bowl, honestly, like
Yeah.
as much as and not to upset Seahawk fandom, but when Russ won his Super Bowl, Russ was an additional piece at that
Mm,
time. He wasn't the Russell Cook era. It wasn't any of that. It was Russ, go out there, make a couple throws, make a play, but don't lose the game for us.
yes.
And that's where it's different. It's the same thing with Purdy.
Yeah.
Purdy, go out there, don't lose us the game. Patrick Mahomes, it's Patrick, we need you to go out there and win the game.
Right.
And that's where I look at how different it is. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens with the Niners this offseason, because building a team around a guy that is you can win with, not he
Mm,
can win for you, is very different. And that's where some of these contracts they got coming up, Armstead, Debo, Ayuk, Ayuk's
mm.
girlfriend's out there and him not committing to coming back you know, to San Francisco, and his brother's out there on social media saying this is why we're leaving. Like,
Yeah.
man, it's a crazy world we live in with these guys, less than 24 hours after they lose a big game saying, well, this is why I'm not coming back and playing for this team anymore. Like, okay then, if that's
Yeah.
how you really feel. But if they throw a bag of money at you, I'm pretty sure you're going to turn around and be like, oh, I love you and I never wanted to leave. And that was just delete. So it'll be very interesting to see what kind of happens. But yeah, no, Brock's a good quarterback. He's just
Yeah.
not a win you an MVP type quarterback.
Yeah, and that was just my biggest problem with him this year, where again, statistics comes up and he's in the MVP conversations. Their best player on offense, Christian McCaffrey, and it ran through him, and you saw what happened when they stopped going through him in the Super Bowl, and it sputtered, and I really believe they would have scored a touchdown in overtime if they just kept feeding him. It was just like they weren't stopping him. He was continually getting positive yards, and it was like all of a sudden they stopped doing it, and I was like, okay, sweet. Now they got a chance to stop these guys, because it just didn't look like they're. And in a guy like that, he would have been determined to get in the end zone, and for some reason, Kyle decided to outthink himself, and that's what happened. But yeah, man, we'll see. So that being said, um, obviously the new regime we're going to be seeing the Niners, and it's going to be interesting. Um, the matchups coming up in the next few years, head to head, and a guy that you and I haven't touched on yet, but obviously super stoked about, is the new OC, the Ryan Grubb hire. We thought he was gone, like he was signing and he was going to stay in college, and all of a sudden he's back up here in Seattle and spotted. And wait a second, what was he doing here, right? What's your take, man, on Grubb, and how you feeling?
Honestly, so how I'm feeling is I'm super excited for this. This guy's innovative. I think he's going to bring a new flair to what we do in Seattle and really make Seattle's offense unique. Because, I was thinking about it the other day, the way he uses his motion and his shift and stuff like that. There's no one in the NFL that really does that. Like McVay's got his way of doing things with the wide zone, Shanahan's, but they don't shift a lot. They do a little bit of motion, but nothing to what Grubb does. The guy that comes closest, in my opinion, is Mike McDaniel down in Miami, with how he moves Tyreek around and all these orbits and stuff like that. That's similar to what Grubb does. But, there's a lot of people out there going, oh, well, they're pass happy at Washington. Dude's an O-line guy. That's where
Yeah.
he came from. When he was at Sioux Falls down there, they had one of the best rushing teams in the country in NAIA. Then he goes to Eastern Michigan and has two guys get drafted to the NFL off his O-line. Like, he knows how to run the ball.
Yeah.
He's developed different offenses to fit what he needs to do. Like, he had Jake Hayner at Fresno, and they were a pass mix run team. Then you go to Washington, and you got Michael Penix and all these receivers. Of course you're going to throw the damn football.
Right. Yeah.
But he was still able to take, a situation where they lost their starting running back in Cam Davis and put in Dylan Johnson. And Dylan Johnson still ran over for 1,000 yards last year. So it's, he's very good at devising things and attacking weaknesses and matchups. And that's something we haven't had in Seattle for a very long time. Like, honestly, offensively, the last guy I can think about that was really good at attacking matchups and doing that was Mike Holmgren. Like, we haven't had it since Mike Holmgren offensively. But in regards to the whole thing about him coming back up here, is he never sold his house, apparently, when the whole thing ended with Washington and DeBoer left. He wanted to be the Washington head coach. We've already talked about that. And, I think a big thing, and this is what it was when he said and came out of that booster thing, oh, I'm your new OC. He never changed his social media page. It was still the same. It was blank. It was colorless. It was bland, essentially. But when you do that and you come out and say that at that booster thing, there was a kind of a clause that was in place at that time where they wanted to wait out the 30-day period for the transfer portal on DeBoer's guys. So I think it was kind of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge agreement between him being like, hey, if Seattle really pursues me, I'm going back, Kalen. Sorry, I didn't really want to come here in the first place. I turned down this job the year before to Nick Saban, of all people. I tried to be your replacement in Washington. I wanted to stay there. My family likes it here. I like the lifestyle. And Kalen probably said, okay, fine. If they come after you, you have my, blessing to go. But you got to wait until my 30-day period's up for guys to transfer out so no one leaves. And that's kind of what happened, because it's now been made official today that he's now on the Seahawks roster. Well, no one from Alabama can transfer out. And it doesn't hurt Alabama. Like, he didn't do any practices. They didn't install anything. Kalen's theoretically the guy that designed the offense. So, honestly, for us, though, this is huge. And from what Mike MacDonald has said in his couple press moments with the Brock and Salk show and some other thing is, Ryan Grubb was his guy. Like, he was going after Grubb. And that comes from going against him, or guys that he knows going against him at Michigan this year, and just, guys he's been following and talking to about how this guy designs offense. Like, apparently he's an excellent communicator. He's great for, being on guys and holding guys accountable. And that's one thing that's kind of been a theme this offseason, is getting guys to be held accountable. So I think it'll be really good. I love that Seahawks Twitter broke the news, because I remember messaging you that night and being
Yeah.
like, hey, dude, like, they're sitting
Yeah.
across at this is actually like happening. And you being like, what do you mean? I'm like, there's photo proof. Like, they are sitting down having
Yeah.
beers. Ryan Grubb's about to be our OC. So
Yeah.
no, that was kind of a cool moment. And, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this offense shapes up and looks going forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. I think it's you mentioned all the pre-snap motion and just get guys flying around like that's kind of the NFL now, right? Like that's what you want to do, and just stagnant offense in the past here. And obviously, we've touched on Shane, and we don't need to do that, obviously. And you and me joked about that JSN little clip where I don't know who was interviewing him there, but that maybe Chicago guys or whatever. But how give us your take on Shane, and he stuttered and then asked if we're live on air, and they said no, and then he's like he still didn't know what to say. So that just kind of tells you that they realize that look, JSN, we know, he was not getting used in this offense properly. Sort of broke out a little bit in the end of the season, but man, he was like, the first half, it was like, how does this guy not? He doesn't even touch a football, essentially, right? So, yeah. So with Grubb, the only thing is, obviously, people are like, okay, he's never been an NFL guy, but you know what? I think this guy's he's a smart guy, and he's gonna come in and Mike and John, they know how to bring. It seems like they're making all the right moves. So I'm excited about Grubb, man, just because we got so many pieces on this offense, and I believe in it. So, what do you think? What does this mean for with Grubb in, and Mike and John, all this kind of stuff? What could it mean for Geno? The Feb 15th deadline coming up in a couple of days. I think it's Feb 15th, right? So
it's Feb 15th because the 16th it goes.
Right. So, and we've broken down his contract before, and you can run through that, but is it change anything, or I mean, I guess it's unknown. What do you think there?
I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, because John's been so uncommittal on Geno, like lukewarm, I would say is the term to use. You had Mike MacDonald's initial press conference where he brought up Drew Lock, who's a free agent at the start of the new league year. And then even on Brock and Salk on Monday, Mike MacDonald again brought up how the two guys he's talked to the most have been Lock and Geno. So I'm not sure. Like, it's kind of interesting. Like, it all depends, I think, on how Grubb feels about Geno and what their interactions like. Like, so many people are like, oh, well, Geno fits, Ryan Grubb's system and so on and so forth. And it's like, yes, he does. But, do you want an older quarterback? Like, Geno's not getting younger. Like, Getty doesn't have all the miles. And this isn't me saying I don't love Geno. So please don't take it that way, Seahawk fan base. Like, I love Geno, and I'd be super excited if Geno's coming back playing in this offense, because I think Geno can do it. And in my opinion, I'd like to have Geno back and do the Green Bay thing, draft a kid and let him sit behind Geno. I don't know, man. I think Geno's back. I don't know if they cut him, restructure him, what they do. I don't think you can go into the draft with nobody on your roster as a quarterback.
Right.
And if it's between Lock and Smith, I'd lean towards Geno. Obviously, he was a top 12 guy. And like, his contract isn't that bad. Like, so many people, like, even when we were talking about it earlier in the offseason, like, we were like, oh, it's 31 million. And then I dug into it. Well, no, he didn't hit a bunch of incentives because he was injured, because he didn't meet certain things. They didn't make the playoffs. So really his cap hit's more like 20, 22.
Yeah.
So that's not that bad for a guy that's a top 12 quarterback statistically in the league, and could truly be a bridge quarterback now for you if you go out and get a Michael Penix, a JJ McCarthy, a Spencer Rattler, in the draft, you truly will have that bridge quarterback where you can go, okay, we can roll with Geno another year. Let this guy, even Penix, let him sit. No pressure to come in and have to win, because that's the big thing I don't think people understand with if we go with a rookie right away. This was a 9-win football team.
Right.
We've brought in a new coach, but we still have talent.
Yeah.
I don't think you want to go and step back to like a 5-win football team off of that, because that doesn't look good. If you finish it with, like we said, between 7 and 11 wins next year, that's a positive thing. And that's what this team was expected to do this year, was be a double-digit win team. So I think you roll back Geno. I think you talk about somehow reworking the deal. And you roll with Geno, let Locke do his thing and walk away. Like, you could always bring Locke back on a cheap veteran prove it deal, and draft a kid and see who wins in the competition. But I think that's, if my money's on what I think Seattle's going to do, I think Seattle is going to draft a quarterback in the first 3 rounds. And I think they're going to bring Geno Smith back. That's what I think will end up happening.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you with bringing Geno back and it being that bridge guy. And statistically, the contract sort of fits. You know what I mean? Like, kind of middle of the pack guy, but he's a veteran, and this team has a lot of pieces. Mike comes in. You don't want to just start out maybe with a 3rd round draft pick and slide him in there. You know, the only other thing I could see is if they're working behind the scenes right now to say, bring in another guy, either via trade, free agency, a veteran guy, right? You know, we tossed around the name. We talked to, Chris Kidd last week, and Justin Fields' name was thrown out. But again, you're going to have to pay him like, big money contract soon. And, so there's so many other intangibles there, unless you really think this is the guy, then okay, go get him. He's played in the league, right? And he's getting, and so I could see that, but I agree if they're just saying, let's draft a guy, dump Geno, this kid's going to start Penix, Spencer Rattler, whatever. Yeah, maybe not, so I think that he's going to be like, I need a guy. And like you said, you can win with Geno. Like, nobody, or not nobody, but we definitely didn't think he was the problem at all.
No, he was never the problem last year.
Yeah, like, clean up that interior line. We touched on what we need. So if you do that and you bring Geno in, a la similar to a Jared Goff, this team has pieces. You bring in a staff that gets things. Hey, listen, it's about what's going on in November, December. You get on a roll, people start buying in, the staff gets rolling, the players gets rolling. Hey, I mean, there's no reason why this team can't make the playoffs. And with the Geno Smith, with a young guy behind, so I'm in agreement with you there, man.
So here's the thing too. Like, I honestly don't expect Seattle to stay at 16. I think they're going to trade down on the first and try and recoup their 2nd round pick. If that means we trade down, and here's the thing that I think a lot of people have to look at. When you look at a quarterbacking class, and if your team's interested in a quarterback, look at the following year's class. So the next year. So for us, that'd be the 2025 draft. There's not a lot of good quarterbacks in that draft class.
Right.
A lot of experts are even saying that it's not a strong class. John wants a quarterback. He has wanted a quarterback for years. They are going to come out of this draft with a quarterback unless the draft completely falls in the wrong direction for them and it's not able to be something that occurs. But I think they're going to walk out with one of 4 guys: JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix, Bo Nix, or Spencer Rattler. Those are one of those 4 that I just mentioned. I would say over 80%, I think, is going to be on the Seattle Seahawks roster and get drafted. I don't know which one. It'll depend on the process, but I just don't see John missing on this class when there's such a lull and lack of talent in next year's class. And he's not going to want to wait 2 or 3 more years with Mike MacDonald, because then Geno's now 36, 37, and now your plan's forced even more, where you may have to take a guy you really don't want to take, or wager your entire future to move up for the one guy you hope to get.
Yeah, no, I think we're in agreement, man. I think I think it's a huge percentage that Geno's back, and it's just maybe a little restructure, or we'll see. But like you said, even that contract, it's not that bad. So I think that's the best case scenario, unless, like I said, unless this Fields things happen, or I'm not even saying that's a huge rumor right now or anything. But I could see them going a route like that. But I think you got the guys familiar there, run them back, get things rolling. So yeah, that's how I look at it too. Hey guys, coming up after the break, we're gonna have Kevin Oestreicher from Locked On Ravens join us to talk Mike MacDonald and get his insight on our new Seahawks head coach. Hey guys, welcome back to the show here. With us today is Kevin Oestreicher from he writes for the Ravens Wire, also has his own podcast, Locked on Ravens. And he's thanks for coming on the show, Kevin, and get a chance to talk to you about your former coach, Mike MacDonald there.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on. And this one was a tough one for a lot of Ravens fans to swallow here. But as the year went on, I think many people understood that Mike MacDonald was going to get a head coaching opportunity, and it seemed like this was Seattle's guy. They waited him out, and they reaped their rewards from it.
Yeah, no, hey, so just it's awesome having you on. We sort of want to get your take, obviously, being around the team and just kind of get your perspective on who Mike MacDonald is, right? And just kind of overall, like, what can the Seahawks expect from this guy as a head coach now?
For me, I think he's ready for this. He's spent the last 2 years as Baltimore's defensive coordinator. And the first thing that I loved about Mike MacDonald when he was with the Ravens is the fact that he's so player oriented. And I think that's the way coaching is going nowadays. Anywhere you have these player coaches and especially head coaches, you have to relate to them as a coach. And Mike MacDonald, we saw it when he went up to Michigan for that 1 year as a defensive coordinator. He went because with Baltimore, he was there and he was in a bunch of different roles, working with the defensive line and the secondary. So he's worked at all different levels in the Ravens organization. But him going to Michigan was a way for him to step outside of that Ravens bubble and go do his own thing. Now, obviously, he was there with Jim Harbaugh, and that was a Harbaugh to Harbaugh, and then back to Harbaugh when he came back to Baltimore. But he connected with his players in Michigan, then he comes back. And when he came back, Patrick Queen, who I think some people are already circling as a target for Seattle, whether what happens with Jordan Brooks and Bobby Wagner and whatnot. But Patrick Queen was psyched when Mike MacDonald came back. That's his guy. I don't think I've ever seen somebody so excited for a coach to come in, a coordinator at that, to come in, because he had been with him as a linebackers coach there. But MacDonald showed the passion throughout the 2 years he was with the Ravens as defensive coordinator, showed energy, and showed the adjustments. I think that's one of the things I loved about him from a coaching perspective is sometimes you have coordinators or coaches who can't adjust, and you go in with a specific game plan, and that's the only thing you do, regardless of what happens during the game. Mike MacDonald adjusted on the fly. I mean, we saw it in the AFC Championship game when the Ravens defense got off to a pretty sluggish start against Kansas City. But then in the second half, there were 6 Kansas City possessions. 5 of those were punts, and one of them was the end of the game. So the Ravens did not allow a second half point to the Chiefs. And that just embodies Mike MacDonald and who he is. He's able to go in there. He plays to his players' strengths. The guys that he gets in there, I mean, I'm excited to see what he does with, Devon Witherspoon and guys like Reek Woolen hopefully having a bounce back season there. And you have that. The Ravens had that Swiss Army knife in Kyle Hamilton. I think Witherspoon can be that guy for Seattle, and I'm really excited to see what MacDonald can bring because it's not just his coaching acumen. It's who he is as a person and who he is connecting with his players. It was everything that I think Ravens fans wanted when you're talking about who could succeed John Harbaugh as the next Ravens coach. Who knows what happens with that situation, but I think Seattle definitely got a good one, and in my opinion, I think Seattle won the coaching cycle just based off this hire alone.
So, Kevin, speaking of that, like, how different is Mike MacDonald's scheme to the past DCs? Like, you guys had Martindale in there, and before that, I'm trying to think of who you guys had before that. I think you might have had Spagnuolo for a bit there, but like, how different was his scheme than the past defensive coordinators you guys have had there in Baltimore?
Yeah, the Ravens system is similar, but you talked about it. It is different to an extent. And I think the biggest difference, if we're just talking Don Martindale to Mike MacDonald, is Martindale is a very live by the blitz, die by the blitz coordinator, where he makes adjustments, but his bread and butter is I'm going to put 9 on the line, and I'm either sending everybody or I'm dropping all but 3 back into coverage. And there wasn't really an in-between there. With Mike MacDonald, he's still an aggressive coordinator. I think one trait you're getting from a Ravens defensive coordinator, if you bring them in, is there's going to be aggressiveness. But the difference in Mike MacDonald to Don Martindale is that I think it's more calculated aggressiveness, where he's not just going to blitz to blitz or blitz because that's what feels good in the moment. For me, what he did is he would utilize, especially his secondary, on aggressive timed up blitzes. So using Kyle Hamilton off the edge, he had 3 sacks in 1/2 against the Colts in week 3 because the Colts just literally could not stop what Mike MacDonald was giving him. Arthur Millette, who was their slot guy this past season, they used him off the edge a lot as well. And he had 2 or 3 sacks this year and a bunch of pressures and incompletions that he was able to get there. So for MacDonald, it's also using the players around the field in different ways and putting them in different situations, which is similar to what Don Martindale did, because the NFL is moving to more and more of that positionless defense where everybody plays everywhere. So for Seattle, having a guy like Witherspoon and other very versatile pieces, and maybe you bring in a couple of guys there, it is similar to what the Ravens are going to do. But that Ravens system is kind of implanted in a bunch of different organizations now. And obviously with that now being in Seattle, we're going to see, I think, with the system that McDonald's going to run, with all the players he has, it'll be aggressive, but it's not going to be just blind aggressiveness and you're only going to get that. Obviously, he can drop back. He can play the zone. He can play single high. He can play two high shell. So there's a lot that McDonald can run it in Seattle, and I'm excited to see what it is.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. Like you bring up, it's funny you bring up, like we obviously love Witherspoon and Seattle nailed that pick. You bring up Reek Woolen, who really struggled last year. Everybody was really high on him, his rookie season. Obviously, a lot of picks, which, really kind of gave him a little more hype. But, super good athlete, a lot of tools, right, in the bag. So, when before this move, Bryce and I talked a lot about, who might not be on this roster and you're throwing names, even to Draymond Jones. After Mike got hired, you're like, well, wait a second. This is kind of interesting now because we went defensive coach. What can Mike get out of some of these guys, like a Reek, like a Draymond, even a Diggs, who, hey, he's a veteran guy that, do we keep him because of that presence? His contract's big, but because before this, we were all about, Ben Johnson was on the top of our list because we looked at, hey, this is an offensive league, the past Super Bowl winners, offensive coaches, and we sort of ignored that fact. We're like, hey, let's go kind of comp defense with a high-powered offense and get a guy in here to go against the Shanahan and McVays. Then when Mike's name was swirling a little more, and you were like, hey, you know what? Our defense has been poor, and how about slowing these teams down and getting back to Seahawks defense? So then we started really learning him a little more and really got excited about this. So I guess, like, I know you touched on a little bit, but what's his sort of most attractive quality that you think John Schneider saw in him and was like, this is our guy?
I think for McDonald, being so young and having the experience he's had, I think was probably really attractive to the entire Seattle organization when trying to figure out who their next coach is going to be. And you kind of talked about it a little bit there. The NFL is shifting into, well, if you're hiring a coach, it has to be this young, innovative offensive mind. And that's like the poster child for what everybody wants in a coach nowadays. But then you have a guy in Mike MacDonald who in 2 seasons with the Ravens, I really look, and there was one bad game he had. It was Miami week 2 of last season when the Ravens were up, I think, three scores, I think it was, in the fourth quarter, and that fourth quarter lead was blown. And the Ravens had fourth quarter issues last year. But McDonald adjusted throughout the year, and with him working on the defensive line, with him working in the secondary, obviously him being the inside linebackers coach and having that experience, him working at so many multiple levels and moving around so much, and him only being 36 years old. I mean, Seattle goes from the oldest head coach in the league to the youngest. Obviously, that was a huge storyline with this hire. I think it's a young, innovative mind, but to me, a young, innovative mind doesn't have to be an offensive genius. Mike MacDonald's a defensive genius, and I think that some organizations are so caught up in the fact that, well, with a young quarterback, we need to have a young coach that's offensive minded, or, with, Geno being there in Seattle, well, who's going to be the next guy to work with Geno, or who's going to be whoever replaces Geno? Who's it going to be? But for a defensive coach, the Ravens had issues under Don Martindale, and MacDonald came in and essentially tightened them up in a span of 3 or 4 months and then built on that in year 2. So with Seattle having some holes here and some poor qualities on defense there, I think MacDonald can come in. You're bringing a guy like Leslie Frazier to kind of be his right-hand man. I know MacDonald's going to be calling the plays here, so you're not missing out on MacDonald not calling those plays. For him, getting the best out of some of these players where over the past 2 seasons, MacDonald has gotten the best out of guys like Justin Madubuike in Baltimore, Patrick Queen. Obviously, he molded Kyle Hamilton into one of the best safeties. And obviously, it's not just him. The positional coaches that Baltimore had, like an Anthony Weaver, Denard Wilson, who both got defensive coordinator jobs. I'm not saying it was all Mike MacDonald, but there's a huge reason why Baltimore's defense took a leap and why it's been regarded as one of the best defenses, top 5, honestly, and I think best last year. And MacDonald, obviously, with it being his defense, a huge part of that.
So with that being said about some of those assistant coaches, Kevin, are you surprised he didn't take anybody with him? Now, I know Weaver and Denard Wilson got offered DC jobs, so they're not obviously going to take that and go be behind Mike again. But Hewitt, some of these other guys, or obviously is now your guys' defensive coordinator. I was just kind of surprised that nobody really followed him from Baltimore to help, with the culture, with the installing of that defense. Did that catch you by surprise that no one really has followed him over?
It did a little bit. I won't lie. I think if I had to guess of kind of what had to happen here, when the Ravens hired Todd Monken last year, they had the luxury of having a really drawn out offensive coordinator process. They could really do their research and do their due diligence. They couldn't do that this time around. I think what probably happened was the Ravens were between Anthony Weaver and Zach Orr for the defensive coordinator job, and both those guys were getting offers. There were rumblings that Zach Orr, there was interest from Mike MacDonald to bring him over as a defensive coordinator, but I'm sure what probably happened was there were conversations, and whether, the Ravens upped the money on the defensive coordinator offer, or they just offered it to him and he loves the organization so much. One of those guys was walking out the door, whether it was Zach Orr or Anthony Weaver. Weaver obviously went to Miami for their defensive coordinator job. I think if Baltimore went the other way and had Anthony Weaver as a defensive coordinator, I would probably bet some money Zach Orr probably would have followed Mike MacDonald over to Seattle. But what ended up happening was they offered Orr the job, and Orr has been very vocal about how, he's very indebted to the organization for what happened with his career, how his career ended with the neck injury, and the Ravens gave him an opportunity. So he took that defensive coordinator job, and ultimately Anthony Weaver took the Miami job. Hewitt, I was a little surprised about. Now, the reports are that, and they've announced that he's now the assistant head coach taking over the position Anthony Weaver had. So maybe they offered him that title, and he said, okay, you know what? I'm fine with that promotion. Let's just go with that instead, and I can stay in a place that's familiar. But not having one coach over there is a little shocking to me. Now, maybe he makes up for that with players, and he brings over a couple of guys, whether it is a Patrick Queen type signing or maybe a lower level signing like a Ronald Darby, for example. But not having any coaches over there did surprise me a little bit, especially considering how good that staff was last year.
Yeah, no, for sure. So yeah, you just kind of touched on the end here with free agency, coming up and all this kind of stuff. Do you see a couple guys that, maybe could be coming over and from Baltimore in a Seahawks uni? You mentioned Patrick Queen. Obviously we got our own situation with Jordan Brooks, and what do we do there? He had a pretty good year, solid year, like especially coming off the knee last year, but it's kind of similar, with Mike, if it was kind of a toss up now that, because we talk about, were they Pete's guys or were they John's guys? Because, as it was sort of Pete was right in there with John as far as final says. So now you're really going to see who were Pete guys and who were John guys. And, now with Mike there working with John, maybe does he say, hey, no, listen, I'd rather have Queen and let's bring him in. I mean, I know, and obviously Bobby's an issue that he might not be coming back either. So, but do you see it maybe a couple of Ravens that are coming over in that Seattle defense?
Yeah, if we're having the Queen conversation, I mean, I think that if you're looking at a big money free agent that has the best chance to go over there, I'd probably say him. Now, again, it depends what Seattle feels about Jordan Brooks and Bobby Wagner. They could be looking at a whole new inside linebacker room next year. And so Queen could be a guy, but I think the question that they have to ask themselves is Patrick Queen is going to make probably, I don't know the exact money is going to be, but anywhere from probably 65 to 85 million total. For a Jordan Brooks, are you getting enough production out of him? And do you feel confident enough with Jordan Brooks where you can get him for less than Patrick Queen and have the familiarity, and you can save, I don't know, 20 million total, 25 million total, and that would be okay. An alternative option from Baltimore would be Malik Harrison, who was kind of their 3rd/4th guy in the inside linebacker room, super physical player, and he would probably be more of a depth signing than anything else for Seattle. But the Ravens actually coached him up, and Mike MacDonald was a part of this, to play Sam a little bit, place him outside linebacker. So he has positional versatility, and maybe you bring him over instead of Patrick Queen, and then you re-sign Jordan Brooks. Other options, I mentioned Ronald Darby is a corner that could be really solid depth-wise, wouldn't cost too much money. I know you already kind of have what hopefully your foundational pieces. I know Witherspoon is definitely one of those pieces, but hopefully Reek will and bouncing back. But Darby as a third corner, he was one of the best corners in the NFL by a bunch of metrics this season and limited opportunities. A slot guy like Arthur Millette also could be an option just for depth purposes. And then I think also if McDonald wants other pieces, I know that, there's been some chatter, is Justin Madubuike going to leave Baltimore? I don't think that's an option. I think they're not going to let him walk out the door. But maybe Geno Stone, if Diggs doesn't come back to Seattle, if you're trying to replace a versatile player like that in your secondary, I think Geno Stone has earned a starting role, but that's not going to be in Baltimore with them already having Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton. And Stone had his best year last year in Mike MacDonald. So maybe there are a couple of options. And you look at the edge rushers too. I mean, I know Jadeveon Clowney, who's an old friend over there in Seattle, spent some time over in that organization. Maybe he comes back. Kyle Van Noy as well. So there are a bunch. It's almost like there are three tiers: the high money tiers, mid money tier, and low money tier. And Seattle could be a fit for a player in all three of those tiers if you think about it.
So with that being said about, what Seattle's going to do with their free agent market and bringing over guys from Baltimore, possibly, I got another question for you there, Kevin. What was your favorite games of Mike MacDonald's tenure in Baltimore and defensively? Like what games were you, just the way he called them and everything? What were some of your top games that you remember watching?
There are a couple of them. I think the first one I'll go with is his third ever game as defensive coordinator. I mentioned the second game was that Miami game where they blew that 3-score fourth quarter lead. The next week was a big game for them, was the Patriots in week 3 in Foxborough. And it was a big bounce back game for Mike MacDonald and actually Kyle Hamilton as well. Hamilton really struggled in that game. And the thing that happened in that Miami game in week 2 was it was a feeling out process. Essentially what happened was he played really soft in circumstances he shouldn't have played soft. He played press in other circumstances. And we saw a bunch of that in that game, and it led him to the loss. MacDonald, the game wasn't perfectly called. I think Devontae Parker had like 150 yards receiving on like 4 catches. It was absurd. But he did enough to hang in there. And at the end of the game, Kyle Hamilton forces a fumble on Nelson Aguilar to seal the game. And I just thought it was a good step in the right direction. I think MacDonald took that momentum to where he is today. And then this season, there were a bunch of them. I mean, I think the Lions game was one at M&T Bank Stadium where that game was over probably by the middle of the second quarter. The Lions went for it on fourth down 6 times over the course of that game because they had to. They were up like 28-3 or 28-6 by the time there were like 9 minutes to go in the second quarter. Obviously, the Seattle game was another one where the game script kind of was similar. And I think that's kind of where John said, we have to get our eyes on this guy. Who is this guy that just shut down our offense completely here? So that was another one. But then you look after the bye and the game against San Francisco on Christmas, where that was a huge statement game, arguably the MVP game between Brock Purdy and Lamar Jackson. And Purdy has those interceptions and the defense plays lights out. The next week against Miami, for essentially, I think people forget that Miami was in the conversation for number 1 seed in the AFC because of how terribly their season ended with all those injuries. But back-to-back weeks, Mike MacDonald and that defense showed up. High pressure, high leverage situations. Then the argument that this might not be popular among Ravens fans, but I personally loved the response in the AFC Championship game. Obviously, it was not Lamar Jackson's day. It was not John Harbaugh's day, and the game plan offensively was a wreck. But defensively, they struggled. I mentioned it. They struggled early on. Mahomes diced up that defense in the first quarter and early in the second. But the second half adjustments Mike MacDonald made, and I think the Chiefs got a little conservative. They were just trying to get out of there with a win. But Mike MacDonald would not let them get anything deep until literally the final play of the game when he bet on, look, he made a gamble and he lost that gamble with the aggressiveness, but it was a third down and the Chiefs, they played it perfectly. And we all know that they won the Super Bowl for a reason. But high leverage situations, Mike MacDonald is not going to falter in those. And I think for him, sure, there might be a little bit of an adjustment being the head coach, but he's still calling defensive plays. He's still calling. And I know the talent is different. This is not the Baltimore defense. He's not going to have Roquan Smith, Kyle Hamilton, Madubuike, but there's still talent on that Seattle defense. And I think he's going to utilize it really well.
Yeah. So I guess I got to ask you, obviously you guys were, Super Bowl favorites. You got really close this year. What's the sense out there from the actual, from the Baltimore fans now that he's departing? Is there a sense that the fans feel like, okay, now we're taking 2 steps back to a return to Super Bowl, or is it like, no, we got Lamar? Like how big is this for you guys as far as how we're going to replace this guy as that next coordinator? I know probably people I even heard people, I mean, talking about, hey, we'd rather them fired Harbaugh and have Mike. I mean, that's probably a little far fetched, but you heard a couple of those things, or at least we did. So what's the feel from the fans, just the general, feel out there, with Mike going and the team itself?
Yeah, it's I think people are still very upset, and I mean rightfully so, about how that season ended. And you mentioned it. They were the Super Bowl favorites. They were the best team in the league, in my opinion, this season. But being the best team in the regular season doesn't mean you're going to be the best team in the playoffs. And of course, in today's league, you have to be able to finish in those big moments. And so for Mike MacDonald, I think there was a sense around Baltimore, there was hope that maybe we saw with guys like Ben Johnson going back to Detroit and Bobby Slowick going back to Houston. Even if Gerard Johnson goes back as the quarterback coach in Houston, that, oh, maybe Mike MacDonald will stay for the extra year. And then what you said there is, I think, overwhelmingly within the fan base, John Harbaugh is a great coach, and I stand by that. I think if everybody reset on coaches and it was just fair game, there would be probably 25 to 28 teams lining up out the door for John Harbaugh as their head coach. But sometimes tenures just, they grow old and change is needed. And I think the overwhelming consensus in the fan base right now, which was never going to happen once they made the AFC Championship game, was move on from Harbaugh, and then you have the heir right there in Mike MacDonald. So in the sense was, okay, maybe if he stays a year, you can drag out the Harbaugh thing one more year. And if it doesn't work, then okay, he's still here and you can promote him. But really, the second half of the season cemented in my mind that he was going somewhere, whether it was Seattle or Washington or whatever it was going to be. So I think it's true. People are really upset about him leaving, and feels like an opportunity got away to maybe just have this plan here. It's almost like Mike MacDonald. We could be looking back on this in Baltimore in 5 years, and Mike MacDonald could have, turned the entirety of Seattle around here and had them in contention for Super Bowl after Super Bowl, and the Ravens maybe get their hire wrong or something. And we look back and say, man, what if the Ravens had gone that route? But the reality is the Ravens made their first AFC Championship game since 2012, 2013, the first in the Lamar Jackson era. You're not going to fire a coach who, even though the playoff record since the Super Bowl and the playoff track record has not necessarily been there, I think they only have 3 playoff wins since 2012, 2013. The regular season success they've been a consistent organization. And I think there's probably confidence that, look, Mike MacDonald is one of a kind. You're not going to get another Mike MacDonald, but you keep the system defensively. You bring in Zach Orr as an internal candidate, which was the right decision. And who knows, maybe if the Harbaugh thing doesn't work out, you have another young defensive coordinator who, again, the other thing is MacDonald has called plays. Zach Orr has not called plays before. This is his first time as a coordinator. So there is obviously going to be some sort of a curve, whether it is small or big, with Zach Orr. And with where the Ravens are as an organization right now, you can't afford to have many curves at this point, because with every year that you don't get there, with every year that you don't win, you're wasting a year of Lamar Jackson's prime, as with any quarterback, right? It's the same thing with any other quarterback. You're wasting a year of that quarterback's prime if you don't get there. But it just felt like with what Baltimore had, MacDonald was the clear choice. And I saw some people say, well, just move Harbaugh to the front office and promote MacDonald. John Harbaugh's never going to do this. Have you seen that family coach? I mean, they're so competitive. There was never going to be something like that happening. So they're sticking with he's won a Super Bowl. They had a lot of playoff success early with Harbaugh and Flacco. But the issue with some of the fans is that Flacco era was a decade plus ago. I mean, we're in a new era right now, and these injuries have taken a toll. And then on top of it, the adjustments I talked about with Mike MacDonald have not been there with John Harbaugh a lot of the time, in terms of in 2019, they got punched in the mouth against Tennessee and abandoned the run game. And John Harbaugh said, well, it's just the way the game went. Happened a couple times this year. They abandoned their run identity. And John Harbaugh said, well, it's just the way the game went. Against Kansas City, one of the worst run defenses in the league, they run the ball 16 times, 6 of their running backs. And John Harbaugh again said, well, that's just the way the game went. And fans, I think, are getting tired of that excuse. And while my expectations were AFC Championship for the Ravens going into the season, those changed for me because of how good the team was. And this was probably the best chance they had to win the Super Bowl in the Lamar Jackson era, and honestly dating back a little further than that too. And they blew it. And I think that's where all the disdain in the fan base comes from.
So with your comment there, Kevin, about kind of Mike MacDonald being, one of a kind, you're not going to replicate him. What do you think will, in 5 years from now, do you think Mike MacDonald will be a successful head coach in Seattle, or do you see him possibly, he's got a 6-year contract with us, possibly being on the hot seat in year 5 or year 6, possibly being looking for a new job or possibly being removed out of Seattle?
No, I think you have to give it time. First of all, I think everybody, especially in today's game, I think we see these meteoric rises, and everybody's saying, "Well, that has to be us." And in 1 year, Mike MacDonald has to take the Seattle team and NFC Championship game, and that's the minimum. Where you have to give it a little bit of time, and I think obviously Geno is not the long-term answer in Seattle. And so you're going to be able to once that train ends and you bring in another quarterback and you bring in the pieces. I mean, there are young pieces in Seattle. I mean, Kenneth Walker and Jackson Smith and Jigba and DK Metcalf. And I mean, regardless of how long DK stay ends up being in Seattle, you still have opportunities. I know Tyler Lockett's getting up there in age a little bit, but you still have talent on the offensive side of the ball. I think getting a tight end in there, a solid tight end would do work. I know that, again, the Noah Fant side of that Russell Wilson trade has not really paid off in a way that people were maybe expecting it to be. But I think if you can start defensively, the thing with the Ravens is the Ravens trusted, and this is where I think Seattle has to look at it. With the Mike MacDonald defense, one of the things I said is I feel like the Ravens felt confident enough in their defense where if they held the opposing offense every game to a punt or a field goal, a kick essentially, a punt or a field goal on every possession or most possessions, you feel confident enough in an offense with those pieces around it and Geno Smith to go out there and win you a game. Because if an offense scores 15 points or 18 points, Seattle won't score 20 points every single game. There are bound to be some lulls in a season. But that's what it's going to be. Plus, the identity of Mike MacDonald is his defenses are going to give up some short stuff, going to give up some intermediate stuff. But you rarely get beat deep. And once you hit the red zone, inside the 30, inside the 20, that's when they tighten up, and that's where that kick comes back into the equation. There were multiple times this season where there was a 40-yard run by an offense, and they'd get down to the Ravens' 7-yard line, and the possession would end in 3 points. And the Ravens will take that every single time because they're not getting into the end zone. And you're saving 4 points every single time. So the Seattle offense, it's going to be a big part of it. But if you can get the defense right first, I think the offense will come because there won't be as much pressure on the offense to say, okay, we need to score 25 plus or 30 plus every game to even have a shot in this game. So get that right in the first couple of seasons. You give Mike MacDonald time, get his pieces. It's not all going to come together in one offseason. I think it's going to take a multi-year plan. But if I had to guess, I think Mike's going to be really successful. He's a young coach. He's innovative. And I think he is the type of guy you want to lead your football team, both from a coaching perspective and just the leader of men that he is.
Yeah, no, we're really excited to have him here. And I think Bryce and I touched on it too, just because we don't want to, we're kind of telling Hawks fans, hey, like you said, give it time. And then, we ask people, how are you going to evaluate him like next season? And the biggest thing for us is like, are the players buying in? Are they playing hard? Is that defense? Are guys, do you see other guys flying around like Devin? Is Reek sort of transforming it? Sort of like watch the games. And because I always say, the wins will take care of themselves. Like hey, and not too many 9-8 teams are looking for a new head coach. So like you mentioned, we have pieces on both sides of the ball. So yeah, you know what? You could win 11 games or you may take a step back and win. But how are you sort of setting it up for 2025? Like you said, Geno's not the long-term guy. Maybe they bring in a young guy. Who knows? That's up to John and Mike this offseason. But, so that's sort of our mentality too, is just sort of like, give it time. And how are they responding to the new guy here? And that's why we're excited. I mean, they got a brand new staff across the board too. So it's going to be, it's an interesting time for us, but, and then, when the way you touched on John there, it was interesting too, because it's similarities with obviously Pete Carroll being here for 14 years. And it's just sometimes things run its course, right? Like we love
Right.
Pete but it was really time for a new era here in Seattle. And that's what fans wanted. And the fact you got this young guy coming in who obviously comes from an organization like you guys got over there. I mean, that's the other exciting part. Like just known for defense and the way just the culture there. And that's the other exciting thing. And obviously being under the Harbaughs. So, yeah, we're really, really excited here, man. Yeah. So, hey, Kevin, thanks for joining us, man, coming on and giving your insight. Like, awesome stuff. What do you got going on? Where can people find your stuff?
Yeah, you can find me over on the Locked On Ravens podcast. So we're 5 days a week. We do bonus content as well. I've been doing that show since 2019. So it's been a ride here on Locked On Ravens. It's YouTube, audio form, wherever you find those shows. I did a live show right after Mike MacDonald left, and like an instant reaction. I think 3/4 of my chat were Seattle fans, just being super excited for the hire. So I'm excited for Seattle too. Plus, I think it stings less for Ravens fans. He's out of the conference, and you don't have to compete against them every year. So I'm hoping Seattle wins the NFC. Just for Mike, because he's such a good guy. You can also find me over on the Ravens Wire, writing Ravens content over there. And then I also, I'm doing the Ryan Ripken show now with Cal Ripken Jr.'s son, Ryan. We do both Ravens and Orioles content, Baltimore based, but also talking about, the spicy topics around the NFL and everything going on there. So I appreciate you guys having me. It was a blast.
Awesome, man. Guys, check out Kevin Oestreicher's podcast, YouTube channel. And Kevin, man, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks so much, guys.
All right.
Thanks, Kevin.
Hey guys, that was Kevin Oestreicher. Make sure you check him out on go over to his podcast, Locked On Ravens. Find him on YouTube and anywhere you get your audio. Man, that was like awesome to get Kevin on and having his insight, knowing the team, and just getting his perspective on Mike and what to expect here in Seattle, and just the fact that how when I asked him, what's the vibe over there? Like, you guys gonna really miss him, because we know, a lot of guys, like we're not missing, a few of our guys that have exited the door. So just that kind of gives you a sense of, how important this guy was to the organization.
No, 100%. And like you could tell in the way that Kevin was talking about Mike, and he at one point even said, like, there isn't going to be another Mike MacDonald walking through the door to become coach of the Ravens or in the NFL. Like, he's kind of a one-of-a-kind unicorn, which to me, that again cements, I think, why John took so long with this process. And, you've heard in his, press conference and some of the other beat reporters talk about it, that like the word around the NFL when the interview process started, because Mike interviewed for a bunch of jobs, not just the Seattle job, that he was killing the interviews. Like, people were super impressed. And, Kevin's awfully covered the team for a long time. That really, for me, cemented the fact that I think we got the right guy for the job, the guy that's going to get us back to being a top contending team and truly starting to contend for our division again and for postseason success.
Yeah, and also interesting when we asked him about, because you heard the rumors swirling around about, fans wanted maybe if to keep this guy, you let John go, and you almost got the sense that he would have been down with that. But the fact that they made it this far in the second half of the season, that you weren't going to do that. No, and I don't think people expected that. But it's like the shelf life again. It's no matter how successful a coach is, sometimes they're looking they're looking over here to their right, and they see a young, innovative guy, and Baltimore fans aren't stupid. They're looking and be like, this guy could be our head coach and bring a different kind of, like, just get us over that hump maybe with Lamar and this team with all this talent. And like he said, the each year you kind of waste, and he when he mentioned hey, that's how the game turned out. That's how the game turned out with only running the ball this many times. Like, you got the sense that people are a little like, hey man, what's going on? So it's that again gives you a sense of the importance of this guy, because you're talking about a great coach over there. Like, we're not talking about some mediocre dude who's had some success and they've had a few playoff runs. It's like, no, this guy is a legit coach. So even to bring that up, like, that speaks volumes to me.
Well, and you really think about it. Could we have ever said that in Seattle during Pete's run? Like, we had a guy in here that we were going to replace Pete Carroll with. Like, John Harbaugh is going to go down as probably honestly, besides what? I'm trying to think, Brian Billick, they
Right.
really haven't had a lot of coaching success in Baltimore. So what? You're going to say that they're probably their most successful coach in Ravens history? You're willing to throw him out the window after the AFC Championship possibly for this young up and coming dude? Like, come on, man. Like, we weren't saying that about Pete Carroll. And like their trajectory right now really is kind of what we've been going through. Like, they went through their Super Bowl window with Flacco, and that was like ours with the Legion of
Yeah.
Boom. And then now things have kind of petered off with even the Lamar one. And it's like, but the difference I'll say in that situation, Baltimore's had more season success than we have.
Yes.
And that's the difference between why you keep a John Harbaugh and you move on from a Pete Carroll.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that the two situations are similar, but they're all also different. Obviously, it's been years now with postseason success. And like, look, man, 9 years, 10 years, that's a long time in football, like in any sport, really. But like when we won our Super Bowl, it's 10 years ago now, when you making it back to another Super Bowl. But after that, man, I mean, we know the statistics of our playoff success. So whereas, like you said, with John and just even this year's run, right? AFC Championship and really had that team rolling. Like people were saying constantly, especially near the end of the year, this team is the best team in the NFL. Like, you just thought they are gonna, and we saw what they did to San Francisco, right? So you just thought, okay, if they get there, they're gonna pound them. But like you said, sometimes like you said, playoffs isn't the regular season, but they've had more success. So yeah, I mean, but like I said, yeah, you're not letting them go, but it just speaks volumes with this guy. Get excited about him. And like you and me have talked about, man, like, how are you going to evaluate them? How are they going to look later? Give this thing time, because you know what? There could be some bumps, man. I mean, we're talking about a brand new staff. Like, we're not talking about just one guy. It's like everybody's new. This is a new regime and a new culture. So it's get excited, but don't have like, well, we have these Super Bowl expectations now. Like, just don't, because you can't come in like that. If we go on a run, yeah, hey, great. But like, let's not go there. Let's get excited how this team's going to respond to Mike and his staff.
No, 100%, man. It's gonna take some time. And when we finally get this all sorted out, everyone gets comfortable. Like, I don't want people expecting, because we've got Mike MacDonald now, that we're gonna all of a sudden put the beating on the 49ers defensively. Like, he's got to get some pieces. And he's even said this may not be the same as the Ravens defense that I had in Baltimore. It's going to be different. We got to see what we got. The biggest thing for me that I'm going to be interested with this new regime, especially with what they've done, is what's the draft going to look like.
Right.
And that's something we'll be able to talk about going forward, because our trade back's going to happen the same way they've had for years. Maybe that was more of a Pete thing than it was a John thing. I still think it was more of a John thing, but you never know.
Yeah.
So does John get to be more aggressive? The one thing I'll say about Mike MacDonald and John Schneider, since they've now come together and that hire has happened, this entire coaching search from John Schneider and Mike MacDonald, you look at some of the guys they brought in, it's been very, very meticulous and a machine-like strategy. Like, there has not been something that hasn't been thought out. And you look at all these guys that they have hired, it's been kind of insane just how long they've waited for some guys and who they've picked and whatnot. So it'll be really interesting.
Yeah, no, really interesting. But yeah. So anyways, man, that was Kevin Oestreicher. Awesome having on the show. Guys, check him out. YouTube, anywhere you get your audio. I mean, he was super informative. Knows his Ravens. So especially if you're a Ravens fan, man, jump on board with that. So, but you know what? We're gonna get out of here for tonight, and we will start kind of gearing up for draft. And I know we're gonna have some mocks coming up. Seattle, our Seattle mock, and a couple exciting things that are kind of coming down the pipeline. A couple real good guests coming on soon as well. So guys, hit the subscribe button, like, share, all that stuff, so we keep bringing this stuff. So all right, man, let's get out of here, and we'll see you guys on the next one.
Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.